Also, on the day after the eviction, I got a call from a friend of mine in bil'in, a small Palestinian village in the West Bank, to tell me that at the same time as we were being evicted, 200 soldiers had invaded the village and arrested 7 people. So I went back, but little did I know at the time that bil'in would become my home for the next 6 months. Can you start the photos, please? Of course, bil'in isn't just any ordinary village. It's situated right on the apartheid wall that Israel has built, which has stolen over half of their land. bil'in is a traditional farming village, so many farmers lost everything they ever had when the wall was built. Now, every Friday for the last 5 years, and that's going back to when construction on the wall began, the people of bil'in have marched there to non-violently protest against the theft of their land, together with Israeli activists and supporters from around the world, to chant and to wave banners and to demonstrate their disgust at Israel's policies in a peaceful manner. So for 6 months, I marched with them. And every week, without fail, we were met with the force of the Israeli army, clouds of tear gas, deafening sound grenades, rubber-coated steel bullets, and even live ammunition. Now, in response to the non-violent demonstration, the Israeli army launched a campaign of intimidation and harassment against the people of bil'in. For 4 months straight, the Israeli army would raid the village every night, dragging young teenage boys from their beds as they slept, some as young as 13 or 14 years old, and throwing them in jail for months on end, purely for the fact that they dared to participate in the demonstrations. Now, when I first arrived in the village, these were just any young guys being arrested, but as 1 month, 2 months passed, it became my close friends and people I was hanging out with in the day being taken from us at night. And the invasions were not only limited to nights. Sometimes the army would raid the village in the day just to harass the people living there. I remember during one of these day invasions, the head of the army went to the mother of the family I was living with, one of the closest houses to the wall. And he said to her, "If these demonstrations don't stop, we're going to come back and blow up your house." So it's a wonder we got any sleep around there. But more than this, I want to tell you about the people I met in bil'in, the people that didn't become like my family, but who I consider are my family. The first person I ever met in the village was a guy called Haitham. He was working as a filmmaker and came out every night to document the night raids, and of course every Friday to film the demonstrations. Now, since the non-violent resistance had begun, Haitham had lost his regular job as an electrician and therefore his only form of income. And I remember once asking him why he sacrificed so much time and effort to do what he does, and he told me that he was arrested when he was 15 years old in a similar night raid and thrown in jail for 2 years. And he said that he didn't want the boys being arrested now to feel as afraid and alone as he felt when he was arrested as a young boy. Now, Haitham's youngest child is a 2-year-old boy called Kami. And when he was just a few months old, he was diagnosed with leukemia. Now, before the resistance began, Haitham would take his son to the hospital in Jerusalem every day to get treatment. But since Haitham began filming the night raids and the demonstrations, the Israeli army have refused to renew his permit to travel to Jerusalem. So as a punishment for daring to play a role in a non-violent resistance movement, Haitham is not allowed to take his small son to the hospital in Jerusalem to get the treatment he needs to live. Now, for nearly my whole time in bil'in, I was living with a young guy called Hamdi. He's 22 years old, working as a photographer, and has all the same ambitions as me or you. But the only difference is that Hamdi is faced with the reality of being trapped under a military occupation. Every night we would sit up in his room together, listening to music and waiting for news of another invasion, wondering which one of our friends will be arrested next. But I can't count Hamdi as a friend of mine because 6 months is far too long for that. So he's my brother and he always will be. Now Hamdi's oldest brother is a guy called Khamis. During one of the Friday demonstrations, Khamis was standing with his arms in the air when he was shot in the head by an Israeli soldier standing around 20 meters away with a high-velocity tear gas canister. He was in a coma for 2 weeks and stayed in hospital for several months after that, and he still suffers from his injuries today. And you could tell because all his brothers were very jokey people, whereas Khamis was much more serious and would get angry easily over small things. But nevertheless, we became very close, and I remember once talking to Khamis about a week before I was due to leave bil'in, and he said, "Jody, I don't want you to leave because it will be like Bassem." And he was talking about his cousin, Bassem Abrahma, who was killed during one of the demonstrations in April of last year. Now, at the time he was killed, Bassem, one of the most active members of the community, was standing at the very front of the demonstration with his arms in the air, shouting at Israeli soldiers, "Stop shooting because I think you've injured an Israeli activist." And they killed him there and then. Because this thing that is happening in bil'in, this is the thing that the Israeli government are most afraid of. And that is Palestinians and Israelis standing side by side to oppose the occupation.